This one is going to be not really long. It's about 16 slides, and we're going to talk a little bit about something called landscape archaeology. It has a close association to geography, particularly human geography. Archaeologists no longer study just pottery, tools, art, and architecture. They study the expanses of human geographic spaces because they're looking for a more integrated picture of the human past, which you really could not get from the ground staring at pottery when you stop and think about it. You need to get up and above. You need to see the expanses in which humans lived. So this is now, landscape archaeology is relatively new discipline. I would say probably, Barbara may know, 25 years, if that. And it is growing by leaps and bounds. But what they look for, one of the things they look for are marks in the ground. We can see up there, Brazil and Bolivia, there are large pre-Columbian settlements coming to light with the cutting of the Amazonian trees. No one knew about these. They were unknown. We've always thought of the Amazon forest as having these small tribes that have been heavily studied, and it apparently is not the truth. We also know that people do things that are meant to be seen from above, like the Great Serpent Mound. What does it mean? What did that huge landscape, that huge expanse mean to them? Why did they need to do that? Why did they need to expend the manpower to do that? That is something both human geography and landscape archaeology would be interested in. What is it? It's a framework for modeling the ways that people in the past conceptualized, organized, and manipulated their environment, and the way that those places have shaped their occupants' behaviors and identities. So it's not really, let's dig up the pottery, I can tell you who made this. It's much broader. They're going to look at very large landscapes, often urban landscapes where they're available. This is one of them. This is Angkor Thom in Cambodia. It's about 2.5 miles from Angkor Wat. And they were interested in trying to find the bronze workshop of the king. They provided and made very beautiful bronze works. Look at the detail of this city. That is probably 1,000 years old, if not more. Detailed. The architecture is amazing. It was huge in large population cities, very active, very busy. The whole area was probably bigger and more organized than any European medieval city. So it's very interesting when you start looking at things from the landscape perspective. They're looking through trees, they're looking through the soil, and now they're answering questions they weren't even able to formulate before. What's human geography? It's just about anything that's not physical geography. And physical geography is going to cover the surface: water, ice movement, climate, and soil. Human geography may encompass transportation, migration, land use, globalization, urbanization, and the impact of deforestation on cultures and on human life. So you can see both human geography and landscape archaeology are very broad in their interest in what they look at. This is an interesting graph for urbanization in the USA, which is about 83%. I don't know if people knew that, but we are a heavily urbanized society, probably greater than 83% now. We want to know the physical form and the structure of urban places. That's going to tell us as much, if not more, than the study of pottery and art. This is something that people needed to start working on, and it really wasn't until they started looking at a broader perspective of things that they understood some of what was happening. So how do these two disciplines actually relate to one another? This is a picture of the Mayan city of Tikal. Some of you have visited it. Look at the way it looks in the jungle. If you can go visit it, you can see it, but this is the way it would have looked before even some of that was uncovered. This is what on the right, what LIDAR has shown them, which is a kind of light emitting. It's a radar. Let's say it's a laser that looks through the canopy. This now shows that Tikal was huge, and they believe the human landscape may have encompassed perhaps millions of people. They had no understanding of that before this LIDAR showed the extent of the area of the Mayan empire and the Mayan cities. They were huge. Shovels and pottery would not tell them that. The word landscape in and of itself draws in geography. It's a term used by earth scientists, planners, and historians. Many consider it geography a sister discipline. Upon the later advent of widely available geographic technology, landscape began to be seen as an archaeological field, which allowed them to really see the topography of human space, not the land, but how people occupied it. This is an example. This is a map. The purple lines are Roman roads. That is a huge amount of work, isn't it? Imagine the number of men, the number of years, the amount of work that went into making that many roads in the Roman Empire. It gives you immediately a sense of the strength and the power of Rome in a way that maybe just looking at the Colosseum would not give you. You can see the gold circles along the coast of shipwrecks. They had an interesting archaeology I didn't want to study. It's called the Archaeology of Rats. And that's what all the black crosses are, so I avoided the information about that one. The other circles are burial sites. This is from Harvard. If you want to look at it online, it's DARMC Archaeological Studies. But this is one of the things that landscape archaeologists and human geographers would look at. Transportation, power, the ability to make these roads, to maintain these roads. It's really amazing. They also are going to use a lot of other sources along with this kind of mapping information. But the remote sensing tools via satellite have become integral to many archaeological studies. It is no longer shovels, pickaxes, and pottery. Geographic information systems, which is what this is based on, is used extensively across multiple platforms. We see it all the time in our weather maps. It's now a regular part of archaeology and geography. To map archaeological sites, maybe in a region, to trace trade networks, to record exact artifact locations in a cave site. Both disciplines would ask about the manpower, the time, the materials involved. So what are archaeologists looking for? Well, we sort of know they're looking for the way humans modify land in large and small ways. Building, digging, removing plants, adding plants, making tools, changing soil, dumping trash, shells. This is a tool midden in Texas. It goes back 15,000 years. That is 15,000 years of tool making by the Native Americans living in that site. You can visit it, or you used to be able to. You can see the layers of soil with all of the remnants of the work involved that go back thousands of years. Students working in the foreground. They may take a human geography approach to look at the soil, determine plant use, cooking practices, soil types, and some of this would also cross into physical geography. Population size, errors, how many did they break? Uses of tools. Is it a place of habitation or reserved for tool making? This got to be very interesting to me, and I would love to spend more time on it sometime. This really is interesting use of landscape archaeology because this is relatively recent information. We've always thought of the Brazilian rainforest, the Amazon rainforest, as pristine, as untouched and full of these remarkably colorful and interesting small tribes. And it turns out that has not been true for several thousand years, only for perhaps the last 500 years. One of the examples that still exists, and it's found over on the mouth of the Amazon, is Marajo Island. It's a very large island. It was around for about 400 AD to 1000 AD. Humans have been present there since 3,000 years ago. It was a mound building society, and it was very complex from 800 AD to actually 1400 AD. They built causeways, ramps, large earthworks, canals, ponds. It was a large population, not a forest tribe. You can see by the pottery they made up there, this is not made by a small forest tribe. This is really well done and artistic pottery. The rainforest was long thought to be pristine, touched only lightly by forest tribes, but this hasn't been true for thousands of years. Humans lived in and impacted much of the Amazon rainforest, changing forest patterns over these huge areas, and in some places creating enormous geoglyphs. Where did they go? They disappeared under the forest cover, which came back in the last 500 years. Well, what happened 500 years ago? Destruction and disease as the Spanish arrived. Disease killed millions of people, and very likely millions of people here in the Amazon forest. After they were gone or reduced to Amazonian forest tribes, I don't know. The forests covered the land rapidly to become what we know today. Brazil's acre state is up there at the blue circle. Note, this is something to keep in mind, the deep forests on our own east coast were not pristine in 1492. All of North America was heavily populated and in use. Now, these are something I found very interesting. They're old, although they continued to do them for a while. Parts of the Brazilian rainforest became dry and created a savanna-like situation. In those places, the groups settling, the culture settling, created what are called forest islands, and they are artificial, and you find thousands of them. How did they know they were artificial? By studying the soil, by studying what grew in them, and by looking at the landscape. Interestingly enough, they've now become part of the ecosystem because there are some rare species that now live in there, including a threatened macaw. Many of them are protected now, but they are examples of human behavior that probably goes back to 10,000 years. We know that humans have been in South America for maybe 18,000, 20,000 years. They're a little iffy about sometimes what they say, but we're probably, I'm thinking it's probably at least 20,000 years earlier than in North America, most likely. They were settling, moving, doing some small agriculture all over these kinds of savannas. That's what you see, and that's what you get. There are now thousands of those. They started growing manioc about 10,000 years ago. They started maize at 6,800 years ago, and maize originally was domesticated in Mexico, so it had come south and been accepted as a domesticated plant. They were living in a mixed landscape of hunting and gathering and domesticated plants. By about 1,500 years ago, they were building canals and raised fields, and maybe earlier than that, and were an agricultural society. This is the ever-changing forest. Never pristine or not pristine for thousands of years as we thought it was. This information is all relatively new. What we see up on the left is a deforestation map from 2004. It's probably more extensive since then. Yellow is non-forest, red is deforestation, green is what remains. Then on the right, we see that Brazil's current president has emphasized cutting down more of the forest. The yellow is recent deforestation, and some of the fires are shown in purple and red. So it's pretty sad, but you can see quite a bit is left. And what's interesting is a lot of it is left, and that is all actually probably less than 500 or 600 years old. So the researchers found that the forest had been bamboo dominated for at least 6,000 years. But the rainforest in Bolivia converted to savanna about 6,000 years ago. But the forest in Acre, where a lot of people were living, stayed strong. Across the basin, relative abundance and richness of domesticated species increased in forests and on and around archaeological sites. In southwestern and eastern Amazonian, the distance to archaeological sites strongly influences the relative abundance and richness of domesticated species. These people were very active and large populations, large settlements, large cultures, not small forest tribes. Our analyses, they said, indicate that modern tree communities in Amazonia are structured to an important extent by a long history of plant domestication by Amazonian peoples. So the trees that we see often are a result of what people have been doing in the Amazon for thousands of years. And frankly, nobody really understood that until recently. Modern forest clear cutting has resulted in opening up our eyes and our minds to what had once been done of the people who had once lived there. There are about 450 of these glyphs in the state of Acre, and more are found yearly in Bolivia as well. The dates range from about 2,000 years ago to 650 years ago. Some of these, the ditches on these, the ditches alone are 36 feet wide and 13 feet deep. And that is a lot of, I don't know where my phone has gone, that is a lot of work and no small forest tribe would be able to do that. Pre-contact population for the entire Amazon basin are believed to be in the millions. Although known of since at least the 1970s,
Bonnie Shirley, 562.
it was, okay, somebody trying to sell me something.
Yeah.
It was high resolution aerial and satellite photos that really demonstrated the large number of them. Once it was understood that they were not just real, but existed in high numbers, search was on to locate more by air and satellite. And in 2010, Google Earth was being used to capture even more of them. Initial studies made it clear that humans had not had just a small impact, but a large impact on forest cover in this huge area. These landscape changes have been subject to analysis by earth scientists, botanists, geographers, and archaeologists. So here are some of them. On the left, you can see forest cover is about what, 1/2 to 1/3 of that picture up there. It's very dense. And where they have deforested, suddenly out of the forest comes these deep geoglyphs with deep ditches. Startling to say the least. The one on the right is Fazenda Colorada, also in Acre, I believe. And they are using BP, which is a little confusing, but what they're saying is that's dated to about 1,925 years, the first use, to 1,608 years ago. Second use, 1,275 years ago to 1,000 years ago. Excavations have shown they were built and used sporadically as ceremonial and public gathering sites. But some may have been constructed as early as 3,500 years ago. This is all new. They're still working. They're still analyzing. So evidence is coming in almost every few months. So what they have is still pretty new. Evidence is based on an almost complete absence of cultural material found within the enclosed areas. So they were not living in these. They were doing something. They were believed to be kept ritually clean. So we don't know why. We don't know what they were doing, but they were not living within these circles here. One startling conclusion was that these hundreds of geoglyphs were built in an anthropogenic forest, meaning the forest where they were placed had been modified by humans for several thousand years. All very new information about the Amazon. There were small urban polities. It's not big enough to say city, but they were certainly settlements. They were joined by causeways. They had roads connecting them. People were some of them living inside palisades, ringed villages, some walled, and they were extensive. extensive, thousands of people, not a small forest tribe at all. And they were making large clusters of homes, some of them 370 acres in size, with a population in the mid thousands distributed between walled towns. These are all gone. After the destruction of the New World by war and disease, the forests came back and covered everything. We would never have known that there were thousands of people living in these areas unless somebody cut some of the trees down, or in the absence of that, had some reason to do a LiDAR flyover to show that there was something under the trees. And since LiDAR is fairly expensive and there was no reason at that time to think there was anything under the trees, that was unlikely to happen. So the centers of the two clusters are separated by 20 kilometers, and that's very typical. So they lived in large groups, all probably distantly related to one another, trading with one another, agriculturally inclined, a lot of fishing. They had ponds, they had fish weirs, they had causeways, they had berms, ramps, you name it, they built it. Very large settlements, now completely hidden under the trees. And on the right, we see what we saw in decades of National Geographic articles about the Amazon forest. I remember them. I'm sure the rest of you do too. This is really only the last 500 years. Why? I don't know. Were they there 10,000 years ago? Are they part of the groups that were initially there? I don't know. I don't know about their DNA. I haven't read any genetic studies. Are they what happened after the rest of the group was killed by disease or by destruction? So they were living by fishing, hunting, domesticated food trees, and agriculture in open areas that are now seen to be crisscrossed by ponds, forest islands, weirs, which is a fish trap, berms, causeways, which allowed walking between the ponds. They were developed as kind of an urban garden city, you might say, uniquely adapted to the forested environments of the southern Amazon, and not really seen in exactly this way anywhere else. Now, this is interesting. It's unusual, and for many years, people were very puzzled about it. It was an Amazonian puzzle. What was Terra Preta? What are Amazonian dark earths, and why are there so many of them? Finally, they realized all these thousands of humans that had been living in the forest and around the forest and moving trees, cutting trees, planting domesticated trees, are the ones who did that. This is pre-contact human activity, and it means that activity was far older and more extensive than seen in post-contact centuries. On the right there, you can see the difference between normal tropical soil and Amazonian dark earths. And in articles, you will see them called ADEs. It's very dark. They are made up of charcoal, ceramics, bone, human waste material, food, seeds. They were middens, but they knew what they were doing because they are very fertile. They may run from 50 acres to really huge, hundreds of acres. And that means they are very deep, very old, and they use them for their domesticated plants and trees, and they have been doing it for thousands of years. They are found in the thousands of square kilometers throughout the Amazon basin, which just gives you an idea of exactly how long people were there, how they have made up for the tropical soils. Tropical soils in and of themselves are not necessarily not useful, but what happens is that all that rain leaches away some of the value. So humans had to create value in the soil, and this value lasts for centuries, by the way. Some of them are dated back to as early as 2,400 years, may eventually be dated even earlier. So this represents millennia of activity by thousands of people now lost under forest cover. They domesticated quite a lot. I'm sure a lot of people love pineapples. It comes from southern Brazil and Paraguay. They domesticated it about 6,000 years ago. They spread it north to Mesoamerica by about 2,500 years ago, and the Europeans discovered it about the 16th century. Brazil nut tree, expensive and rare, but those are, their genetic signal make it clear it's been domesticated thousands of years, and that's a very big tree. They took them with them everywhere. They're all over near archaeological sites in the thousands. So they are clearly a domesticated tree. They are now considered the Amazon is now considered a new center of human plant domestication, in addition to the Middle East, China, North America, etc. So it's a new center of plant domestication. All this is fairly new information, by the way. Human modification of landscape is probably the greatest single change for the plant and animal life of the planet since the end of the last ice age. New discoveries in archaeology. This is Ireland. Some of you attended the Irish lectures and remember Newgrange. They did a DNA study on the ashes that they found there. There's the burial chamber on the left. I don't know if Newgrange was built for him or if he was interred later. But he is like an Egyptian pharaoh. He is the product of a first-degree incestuous union, either between parent and child or brother and sister. The central underground room at Newgrange is built so that the sun rises around the time of the winter solstice. In a broad survey of ancient DNA from bone samples collected at other Irish burial sites, they found genetic connections among people interred in other Irish passage tombs, mostly going to be aristocrats. That suggests that the ruling elite were all related to one another, just as we know happened with some of the European royalty and with Egyptian royalty. This is a couple of new things. They discovered a new city, the ancient Mayan city of Saxi, which means white dog. They don't know why. Found on a Mexican cattle ranch in Chiapas. They've been looking for it for a while. They knew about it. It was referenced in other city records. They finally found it. Interestingly enough, the story is that one of the young archaeological graduate students kept being waved at by a food vendor, and he didn't stop to go see him. He thought he was trying to sell him some food, and he was a vegetarian. He finally went to see what the man wanted, and it turned out the man and the owner of the ranch had found that tablet there that's shown there, and they didn't know what to do with it. So they showed it to the archaeologists. They realized what they had found, and they have been excavating there with the permission of the rancher and the Mexican government for some years now. He was a little afraid to talk about it because he was afraid the Mexican government might seize his property. But it was worked out after a number of years, and so they've been excavating since then. In the blue circle in the diagram above is where the palace was. They have found quite a lot, statuary, some of it broken, much of it looted, but they are finding things, and this tablet is really important because it does have writing on it and one of their mythical stories. The Spanish have found another work with beautiful cave art in it recently at a large cave complex called Font Mayor, and it was open as a museum, the cave was. They apparently did not know that in a separate section were all these Paleolithic paintings and artworks, and they're now studying it. Some of the work is delicate and is being recorded as quickly as possible. If people are able to get in there, you can imagine that they will unwittingly probably do things that might damage some of what remains. So that's it for today. In fall, if we are still going, we're going to have a brief overview of the analysis of trace evidence, footprints, for example, left behind by early humans and their ancestors, and the sciences used to date the evidence. I love footprints. It's like almost like seeing them walk by you. And so it's very interesting when they find them in a cave or frozen in mud 1,000,000 years old. I think that's very interesting. I love all the trace evidence left behind, and because it makes them real to me. So I find it very interesting, and I hope you will too. I will see you all then. Thank you.